Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I am Terry Gilman. I'm the owner of Creating Conversations, and I am your host bookstore for this program. I want to take a moment before we begin to thank all of you for the opportunity to host this program. Creating Conversations with Literary Women is the name that we have created for this 7-part series now, which has taken place over the last 16 months. We have had some amazing authors join us. If you were with us, you will remember Elizabeth Wetmore, Patricia Engel, Paulette Giles, Liz Moore, Paula McLean, and Helen McDonald. Tonight is our 7th and last program until the festival, until after the festival in March. As we close out this season, I want to thank my friend Pam Atherton, who, when I call her to tell her that I have another author for her to interview, doesn't hesitate to say yes and often adjusts her schedule to be with us. Pam entertains and informs us with her brilliant insight and questions for our guests. And she is the primary reason, in my opinion, for the success of this program. Tonight, Pam will have another memorable conversation with an author who is very accomplished in her own right, Dawn Turner. They will be talking about her memoir and social history of a small community in Chicago, 3 girls from Bronzeville. I now want to turn the program over to Karna Bramble, a member of Literary Women. She will say a few words and introduce Pam.
Thank you, Terry. Welcome. I'm Karna Bramble. I am a member of Literary Women. Literary Women wants to thank you for choosing to be with us this evening. We are also very pleased to announce, as Terry mentioned, that our Festival of Authors will be Saturday, March 19th, 2022. So put it on your calendars. The 2021 collaboration of Creating Conversations with Literary Women is supported in part by a grant from the Arts Council for Long Beach and the City of Long Beach. We are honored for their support of tonight's event with guest Dawn Turner, and not a guest necessarily, but our favorite, Pam Atherton. Those who have joined us in the past know that Pam's conversations with our authors have been fun, informative, and delightful. So on that note, I turn our evening over to Pam and Dawn. And again, I thank you for your continued participation and support. Pam?
I just have to say that the reason that these are so good is because you get such great guests, such great authors on the show. It's just amazing. All right, we got a couple of housekeeping things we have to do before we start. First of all, thank you to Creating Conversations and Literary Women for creating this series, because during the pandemic, we would not have been able to meet some of these fabulous authors. And this series has allowed us to do so and keep us all together and ready to go for in March when we do the actual in-live event. Excuse me, housekeeping, here we go. Feel free to make comments in the chat box. That's where you can talk with each other. You can talk with the people from Creating Conversations, etc. That's where Creating Conversations will put codes for you so that you can get discounts. They'll give you links on how to get Dawn's book if you don't have it, or how to get the e-version or the audio version. Anyway, you want to get it with special codes, that's the chat box. We will be taking questions at the end of this, and those go in the Q&A. I won't be able to read the chat, so if you have a question, it goes in Q&A, and we'll get to that towards the end. We're not using the raise your hand function, and if you don't have a book, like I said, you can easily get one by the links that will come in the chat box. After the event, you're going to get an email. If you'd like to join the newsletter for Literary Women, you can do so then, or give back your feedback on what you thought of the event. And then you'll also get a link to the event when it's ready to go, because it'll be up online at the YouTube channel for Literary Women in about 2 or 3 weeks. This is a live event. There are going to be dogs barking. There's going to be cats walking across keyboards. There's going to be doorbells ringing. So just be prepared for it. It's real and it's authentic. It's real time. And tonight we are so looking forward to having a great conversation with a lot of laughs and a lot of insight with Dawn Turner. We're going to chat about her latest book, which is called Three Girls of Bronzeville, from Bronzeville, but we're going to delve into some other areas that she can speak to as well. And of course, we're going to take your questions. Let me tell you a little bit about Dawn before we even start. She's an award-winning journalist and a novelist, among other things. She was a former columnist and reporter for the Chicago Tribune, Sorry about that. And she's been a judge for the Pulitzer Prize in the commentary category. She's covered Barack Obama in 2008. She was there at the inauguration, right there beneath the platform. And she was a regular commentator on BBC, NPR's Talk of the Nation. You've seen her on CNN and PBS and NBC's Nightly News. And on top of that, she's reported from around the world, from Sydney, Australia, from Nice, France, from Shanghai, China. She's written 2 novels, and they're called here we go, Only Twice I've Wished for Heaven, and An 8th of August. Now, Only Twice received accolades from the likes of Maya Angelou, and was a notable book of the year for the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune, and she won an Alex Award for it as well. She's awarded a highly sought after National Endowment of the Arts Fellowship and was a Nieman Journalism Fellow at the Harvard University. And her latest book, Three Girls from Bronzeville, has been named a best book for fall from People magazine, Vogue, Town and Country, and Shondaland, among others. And it's recommended by Essence, CNN, Fortune, Goodreads, just to name a few. I frankly have no idea when she sleeps.
Yes.
So, Dawn, we could not be more thrilled to have you on with us today to talk about Three Girls from Bronzeville, a uniquely American memoir of race, faith, and sisterhood. Thank you for being with us.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
I think we have to start with understanding Bronzeville. What's the historical significance of Bronzeville?
Oh, absolutely. Bronzeville is in Chicago, and it is, I call it the cradle of the city's Great Migration. It's where Black people arrived in Chicago fleeing the Jim Crow South. In fact, my great-grandparents arrived here with my grandmother in 1916. My grandmother was 3 years old. And they moved to this place that they expected it to be the promised land. And it was for a while. But then there were so many people who were forced to cram into a small square, just a few square miles of the city. And they called it the Black Belt because it was this kind of, it was this linear area, but it became packed because the city did not know what to do with the influx of migrants. And they consigned them to one specific area. The housing in the area began to deteriorate. That's what happens when you have so many people who live one atop the other. And yet there were challenges, and yet there were people who made a way out of no way. You had Gwendolyn Brooks, who lived in Bronzeville, and she was the first Black person to win the Pulitzer Prize. You had Ida B. Wells, the famed anti-lynching activist and journalist, lived in Bronzeville. All kinds of flourishing of the arts. Louis Armstrong, and you had who was called the grandfather of gospel music, or the father of gospel music, Tommy Dorsey, lived in Bronzeville. And so and then Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who was the first heart surgeon to complete the first successful heart surgery. He lived in Bronzeville and started the country's first privately owned Black hospital, Provident Hospital. So you had people of various classes and education levels, people who worked in the the city stockyards, as well as people who were scientists and just acclaimed journalists and writers. Everybody was packed into this small area of the city.
And it's so historically significant when you
Yes.
take a look, like you mentioned, of all these people who were part of it. And I thought it was interesting too that it was called Bronzeville, because I forget the name of the man who created it, but he said these people aren't black, they're bronze. The color of their skin is bronze. And I thought, oh, what a neat way to say that. So how much does where we live affect us? What does it say to us as a person when the police don't come or the garbage isn't taken out? What does that say to us?
Right. Well, I mean, I always say that this story is about three girls. And so it's about three girls who start out in virtually the same place, and they have very similar aspirations, and they wind up taking three wildly divergent paths. But the story is about, so it's about people, but it's also about place. We grew up in the Theodore K. Lawless Gardens apartments, and it was a place designed and created by a famed Black dermatologist who lived in Bronzeville. And he wanted there to be something for working class residents. And we were kind of working class people with middle class aspirations. And so he said that there's something for the Black elite in this neighborhood. And there's something for the very poor, the Ida B. Wells homes, which was supposed to be, in its early days, was supposed to be the answer to the awful tenements that had come up during the early years of the migration. So we were kind of in the middle. And so our community, I think in the parlance of today's, we would say that it was affordable housing. But it was absolutely, it was beautiful. It was manicured with great precision. And if there was garbage around, the janitors chased down, wayward pieces of garbage with almost a religious fervor. And so it was bright and shiny, but right across the street was the public housing development that was deteriorating. And it was so because the city had abandoned it and had walked away from its responsibilities. And so, as you said earlier, garbage was not picked up in a timely fashion. Streetlights were not replaced. And so when you live in squalor, it's hard for you to, I believe that it's more difficult for you to flourish. And it's so there's so many different factors, but housing definitely plays a huge role in terms of who we are and how we see ourselves.
I think it's interesting and unfortunate that the name of the place where you were living was called Lawless.
Right.
But it was named after the man, right?
That's exactly right. And that was one of the concerns that my mother had. And she had always been a huge fan of Dr. Lawless. But she said that because being a Black person in this country, there's always this feeling of having to walk a tightrope. And so what would it say about people who were striving, and everybody in the community? I mean, there were strivers everywhere, but names matter. And so to say that even though it was a beautiful apartment complex, to say the name was something that was a little disconcerting, and just it gave her pause.
Words matter.
Yes, right. And in our elementary school, which did not help, was called James R. Doolittle. So that was, we were the kids that came of age right after the civil rights movement. And so there was so much promise, and our parents felt that our futures were to be quite robust. And so, part of that promise was that you did have a place that was beautiful and pristine like Lawless, but then the name kind of did something there. And the same thing with the school. The teachers there were magnificent. It was a Chicago public school, but we had access to the best teachers around, but the school was called Doolittle. And so, kids in the neighborhood teased us.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really bad with secrets and giving away endings and stuff. So do you want to give us a little synopsis of the book, just because I would give things away that I maybe shouldn't?
Oh, no, that's okay, because I think that what happens is it doesn't matter. I think we can talk about that. It doesn't matter in terms of the book. My sister, as I said, my best friend and I came of age in the 1970s in the aftermath of the civil rights movement. And our parents saw our futures as being as being robust, that we were supposed to go to college. We were going to get these great jobs, and we were to partake of every aspect of the American dream. We would become homeowners. We would do all of these things. But Deborah and Kim took different paths. My sister died when she was 24 years old, and Deborah went to prison at 32 years old. And so these were two very difficult outcomes for both of our families. There are young people in this country and beyond who they're born into circumstances that where it's very difficult for them to disentangle themselves from, and their futures are almost predestined. But that was not the story, and that always breaks my heart. But that was not Kim's story, and that was not Deborah's story. They come from a very tightly knit families, both of them, and incredibly supportive. And so one of the things that I've searched for, I mean, the question that was kind of the motivating factor for this book was, when did we lose them? And especially because they had the types of social supports that a lot of people don't have.
Well, and psychologists, this has been, and researchers have looked at this and said, how can two people, they choose sisters, how can two people grow up in the exact same environment and one goes one direction and the other goes another? Your sister turning to alcoholism, you becoming on the dean's list, et cetera, to university. And that's a good question. What do you see? What did you learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, you have people who share the same gene pool, and I know that my sister and I were very different from the beginning. And that just happens. We were not cookie cutter. I always say that Deborah, my best friend, and I were best friends, but Kim and Deborah were kind of soulmates, because I mean, they both were the younger of two siblings, two daughters, and they both had kind of a wild side. For me, rules were scaffolding. I kind of depended on them. But for Kim and Deborah, they pushed against them in a way that I didn't. I was not perfect, but I was also told that I was really smart, that I had great test scores, and teachers said that, I mean, in almost every grade, that was something that they trumpeted. But Kim and Deborah were also, I mean, they were incredibly bright, but they were also the kids who were not necessarily, they were not troublemakers, but they did not follow the rules to a letter. And so I think, so they were chastised more for that. And so their intellect wasn't something that was harped on. And so I think that they kind of defined themselves differently.
I guess that goes back to that concept of words matter.
Yes.
I mean, because you made it easy to like you as a kid and you followed the rules and everything. Oh, look at that smart girl. She's a good girl. And the others may have been just as smart, but it's like, oh, she's in trouble again, or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah, but
and I always like to say that I was not perfect. And, I did feel more comfortable following the rules, but I also, I did my things, and I was a little bit more sneaky with it. But yeah, that was it's easier to teach and parent a child like the child I was, than it is to kids who are more rambunctious and kind of, they see the world differently.
So many of us have family members or friends or colleagues or people who are close to us who have dealt with, whether it's drugs or alcohol or some addictive behaviors.
Yeah.
And we all, because the textbooks don't have it right, we all ask each other, what do we do? How do we get out of this? Was there anything you could have done for Kim? And did you even know how bad it was, the alcoholism?
Well, my sister had a life unto herself. So she was quite secretive. And what we all know now about alcoholism and addiction, it's very different from what we knew 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And as you said, we all have someone in our family who's dealing with some type of addiction. But in our family at the time, there were older relatives who were very functional with their alcoholism. I mean, they went to work every day, and they were very committed to their jobs and their families. But I look back now and realize that, well, maybe there was an addiction there. But they were also older, and they didn't, so we had not dealt with anybody who was so young. My sister was 24 years old when she passed away. So we hadn't dealt with anybody who was so young. And in that age group then and now, there are young people who drink. That is just, it's almost like a rite of passage in some cases. And they drink before 24 years old. So it was just something that, I mean, yes, that right now with what I know now, because I wish I could go back and talk to that young woman, my younger self, and say, hey, here are the warning signs. But back then, it just did not look, we were concerned, but it did not seem, we just did not understand the depth of her alcoholism.
I think that's so true of many cases.
Yes.
Right? Because as you had said earlier, alcoholics are very good at hiding and very good at keeping secrets.
Yes.
And so it's like, no, I don't really think it's that bad.
Right, exactly.
So the same thing applies to your friend Deborah. You talked about seeing her spiral down, and that's when she said, I think it wasn't a switch, it wasn't a time, something didn't happen, I was just spiraling. Do you think, looking back now, there's anything you could have done to change that? I mean, we all look back and wonder that, right?
Well, part of this journey for the book is that I had to go through the whole forgiveness thing, because there is some guilt. Because I did ask myself over and over, what could I have done for both of them? I tried to be a good sister, and I tried to be a good friend. But Deborah, again, Deborah's parents were incredibly vigilant in their discussions about drug abuse. And they were, and even when that new drug called crack came out, they were very careful to tell their daughters to just stay away from it. But Deborah and my sister were incredibly, I mean, they were daring people. And, we applaud that in many ways. The people, they become CEOs, or people who develop the next technology that's going to change the world. But they were daring, and Deborah believed that she could, that whatever would happen to someone else in terms of addiction, that it would not be something that would happen to her. And so that is what when she tried crack for the first time, she just thought it was going to be another high. And I mean, she had done marijuana, and she didn't understand how it would devastate her life. She had been told, but she didn't think that it would affect her that way. So there was something about her personality just at that time that just really felt like she could overcome anything.
Right. Well, and especially when we're young, we're invincible, right?
Exactly.
Nothing's going to hurt us. It's just not going to happen.
That's right.
So you wrote 2 novels. You've written about Deborah. You've written about the prison system. What made you all of a sudden say, you know what, I need to write a memoir about this? I
had written, as you mentioned earlier, I'd written a column for the Chicago Tribune for a decade and a half. And as a writer, I found myself drawn to stories about people who made the most of a second chance, and people who were incredibly resilient and who were able to transform their lives. And it occurred to me that the stories that I chose, I was chasing my sister's story and my best friend's story. And so when Deborah went to prison in 2000, that was the first time I wrote about her in the pages of the Chicago Tribune. And it was a story about, divergent paths, 2 girls who had grown up together, and just how they landed in 2 different worlds. I wrote about her, Deborah, again, 2 years later. And, again, because after the first response, I had a lot of readers who contacted me, and they were just really interested in her story, because it is quite compelling. But then I wrote about her in 2007 when she graduated from prison. She graduated from college in prison. And there was an avalanche of emails and letters after that story. And I realized that the first two stories were kind of a cautionary tale, something that you would point to and tell your child, don't go down this road. But the last story in the pages of the Tribune was more of a story of transformation and redemption. And I think that we all love the idea that we can change our lives before the clock runs out. So as I started to look at that story, and at that point, a lot of people said, a lot of readers said, oh, this should be a book. And I wasn't certain if I hadn't just written enough in the pages, because initially in 2000, I did think it was a book. But then I thought I'd written about it enough, and maybe I had kind of gotten it out of my system. But then in 2010, Wes Moore published The Other Wes Moore, which is an amazing book about two young Black men in Baltimore who have the same name, but completely different fates, two completely different lives. One was in prison serving a life sentence without possibility of parole because he murdered a police officer. And the other one was about to go overseas as a part of, I think, a Rhodes Scholar at the time. I mean, that's what it was. And so they both were on the newspaper a few days apart, but these completely different lives. And then I thought, because at the time, Deborah's last name was Trice and my married name is Trice. And so I thought, well, we have the same name, same last name. But we've known the difference in our story and Wes Moore's story was that we've known each other since second grade. And so initially I thought the story so I started to think of it as a book, and I put together a proposal. And the first agent who worked with me on it said, this isn't a story about two girls, because my sister, true to form, leapt off the page. And she said, this is really a story about three girls. And so I felt no more veiled attempts while trying to chase the story through other people, that it was time to tell the story that really laid the foundation for the types of journalism that I wanted to practice.
And your theme of second chances definitely comes through in the book, even from your mother and Andrew, and your sister in Alcoholics Anonymous, and Deborah with college, and you with college. I mean,
Right.
all these second chances, but second chances are tenuous, and we don't always get second chances, and not everybody gets a second chance.
That's right.
So how much of that do you think comes down to empathy?
Well, I think that the whole idea of second chance, it is, if you can get it, can you make the most of it? And so you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people, and particularly Black people, Black men, who don't get a second chance. And so the question is, can we find a way, in terms of empathy, can we find a way to help more people change their lives? Because then maybe we get an idea, or they get a chance to figure out what they can do. Because a lot of people make mistakes. We all make mistakes.
We do.
And a lot of times we don't suffer severe consequences because of a grace far bigger than ourselves, not because we're perfect, or it's because of some outside forces. So I just think that whole second chance, and the more people getting a second chance, is just something important. I've seen it in my life, and I've seen it in Deborah's life, definitely. And my sister did not have an opportunity to make the most of it.
So maybe it's a good lesson to us all that we need to look for occasions to give second chances. Because
yes, I think that there are more occasions than we often determine.
Right. We get so wrapped up in ourselves that we sometimes forget. And the place where Deborah is working is one of those, where they take felons, because, as you well know, not many places will hire felons.
Well, what I found interesting about the Indiana prison system, when everything began in 2000, I thought, oh my God, Indiana is a tough place to deal with the carceral system. And but it turned out that for her, I mean, she had, and a lot of the women there who, I mean, there were so many different programs, that she was able to benefit from, and she threw herself into them, and not just for a time cuts, but as I said, she finished college while in prison, and she became a leader in various programs there. And so even as the women began to transition out of the system, the prison had so many different programs in place to help them. And one of those programs had to deal with housing. Another had to deal with helping them find employment. That was one of her biggest concerns, because she knew that she would be in her 50s when she was released, and she didn't know how she would support herself. And that was
not everywhere offers those things, such as the schooling and
Pardon
those
me?
classes. Not everywhere offers those things, such as the schooling
Exactly.
classes.
And if they do offer, which is the case now in Indiana, so then when legislatures have to deal with budget cuts, I mean, those programs are among the first to be cut.
Right.
And so now that there are women in Indiana who cannot partake of that type of program in order to finish a college degree.
Right. Yeah. The other theme that I thought was really strong in the book was the community of women, the strength and resiliency of Granny, of Aunt Doris, of your mom,
Right.
and how important that is. And even still, just the friendship you had with Deborah. Sometimes I think because of the world being the way it is and the distance we can go from each other, that we've lost some of that.
Well, I'm so happy you said that, because it's really important to me. I mean, yeah, there's some really, and this is what I've been hearing from readers, that there's some very heavy moments in the book, and there's tragedy and sadness, but there's also joy, and there's also this sisterhood that is, and as you said, this friendship, these connections that the women make. It was very important to me not to denigrate the men, because the men are important as well. But the women, for me, the women, and I say this in the beginning of the book, the women were my fort. They were bricks and mortar. I mean, that's who they were for me. And I just to see their strength and their kindness. And my mother, she can turn a phrase. she's a writer in a different way, that she never got the same type of opportunities that I got. But I love the way she sees the world. And then, I mean, just to have that type of support system. That's why I say that, what happened to Kim and Deborah, it was surprising in a way, because, and I'm not saying that bad things do not befall good families, but it was just that they had a lot of the pieces in place that it seems like we should have been able to help them more.
When I read the book, I had to read it slowly, which I read a lot of books for my job. And
Sure.
So to have to read a book slowly, it's like, oh no, right? I'm not going to make it. But I had to read it slowly because it was like a feast. There was comfort food, but then there were new tastes too. And so when it was comfort food, it was things like the group of women, about the Pippi Longstocking thing finder, right? And the bond of best friends with secrets. These are all, comforts that we can all come with, or we can all relate to, or hopefully can, from our childhood. But then I found myself realizing how many times in my own life that things could have taken me in a different direction, how fragile, how thin that line was.
Right.
And I would stop for a second and think, oh my gosh, remember when I did that? What if I had done that instead? Right? And so it's a thin line between good choices and bad choices, but we also have to be careful to realize that choices aren't people, right? You're not a good person or a bad person because of your choice. You've just made a bad choice.
Right. And I also think that choices are also based on conditions. And so the person who, that choices depend on, your pool of choices sometimes depend on your zip code. And I think and so I 100% believe in personal responsibility, where we do have to take responsibility for our actions. I mean, what happened to Deborah? She said that she never wanted to run away from what she had done, but she said that it was that she was guilty of she hoped to be guilty of a lesser charge than she was. She was guilty. She was found guilty of murder, but she hoped to be found guilty of reckless homicide instead. But it didn't turn out that way. But the whole point is that that whole idea of how do you take responsibility? What are your choices? I think it just depends on your setting and your what's in front of you. And as you were talking about the feast of things, it's all of that is kind of this idea that where we are, where we live, I mean, gives us a certain, our given world affords us a certain set of choices as well. Sometimes you have more choices, sometimes you have a limited.
Right. How much stress you're under, what kind of things you've had to face recently. We might make a different decision today than we would have made 2 years ago because we have a different set of circumstances.
Right,
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. So another thing I thought was interesting, you talk about Miss Polaroid, and you mentioned how you had only seen white naked women before.
Yes.
And that startled me. I was like, oh, but of course, you know,
Right.
where else would she have done that? So when did you finally become conscious of race, if you will, and that things were different sometimes between white and black?
That's interesting. Well, just to explain a little bit, Miss Polaroid was a naked photograph of a Black woman that I found in the laundry room of our building. But prior to that, Deborah and I would sneak into the back of her parents' closet, bedroom closet, and we would sneak a look at her father's, I forget exactly if it was a penthouse or whatever it was. And so the idea of seeing this Black woman who was naked was really kind of groundbreaking, because it's just like seeing a Black family on television for the first time. And that was the case with like maybe Good Times or the Jeffersons. It was, and maybe it was a family before then, but I know I write about those two families. But it's just that you become aware of your world. If what you see on television is very, very white, I mean, that becomes, I mean, you know that you're a Black person or a person of color, but your world is kind of defined more by whiteness. Especially on television. But I have to say that growing up, my dentist was Black, my doctor was Black, my minister was Black, my teachers were Black, all but one in elementary school. And so it was very much an insulated world in terms of race. And what I knew about race early on came from the conversations that I would hear either from the men in my family, and they're talking about the South, having grown up there, or the women in my family. And so it was just it was a different, and then it wasn't until my stepfather that I really got a chance to start to read about race and understand so much more context. But yeah, Miss Polaroid was kind of groundbreaking, I think, early
Well, and
on.
I imagine too that when you went to college, that was a real shock.
Oh my God, it was my first time because I went to high school, and it was a predominantly Black high school, but I spent part of the week at the University of Chicago at high school. And so I had more of an interaction, maybe from afar, with kids who were closer to my age, but it wasn't until I went to college that I had white peers. And that was a culture shock. I think for both of us, for the white students, a lot of the white students, as well as for some of the Black students, because we made up a very small percentage of the university at the time. And so we were, there were just so few of us and so few Black students. And so it was, I write that, I mean, for me, the only thing that I knew of my white peers were, was what I watched on the Brady Bunch. And which, because you can't, get all of your information from the Brady Bunch. My fear, though, is what they knew of Black people was what they saw on the 10 o'clock news. And so we had to spend time, and this is why I think, I believe that diversity is so important. whether it's race diversity, class diversity on the college campus, is because you do get a chance to meet people and dispel stereotypes. Some of the stereotypes may stand, but you get a chance to allow people to be beyond the stereotype, and that is really important. Yeah.
Is your mother still alive?
Yes.
Has she read the book?
No.
What
I
an
think it's
initial thing.
difficult, and I understand why it's difficult for her. I mean, so she was my guide throughout, and I took a lot of notes, and over the years just took tons of notes regarding, stories. But her daughter dies, and so I think it's just difficult to relive that. And it was incredibly difficult for me to relive it as a writer, and interviewing people and asking questions that I did not want to know the answers to for a long time. And so this interrogation, so I put on my journalist hat for part of this. And I thought wrongly, I think one of the ways that you write a memoir is to be somewhat delusional, because I thought that I could just disassociate myself and I could just be a journalist interrogating people. And, and that worked to a degree, but then you have to sit with the story, and then revisit every moment that you kind of packed away. And I'm very happy I did it, but this is the most difficult story I've ever written in my life.
How long did it take you to write the book?
In earnest, about 3 years, because I really started to write after Simon & Schuster bought it. But I would say since 2010, I had been gathering string, as they say. And even when I was I say this in jest, but there's some truth to it. Maybe when I was 3 years old, when I first met my sister, that it started then, because that's when I started to collect information about her. Not planning to write a book, but just, she was a mystery to me from the very beginning, just trying to understand who she was.
And let's talk about that, about writing, because the people who come to these, some are writers, some want to be writers, some are just fascinated by the writing world. So let's talk about that a little bit. Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
No, I went to college to be a doctor, because back then that was those were the jobs that would help you kind of leap from one socioeconomic place to another. But I have to say that I always knew that I wanted to tell stories the way my mother, grandmother, and aunt and uncles, the way they told those stories. I wanted to do that, but I didn't think that I could make a living doing that.
So when did that happen? When did you realize that as a journalist, that would be getting your, writing mojo out, right?
Right.
But when did you realize, I want to write a book?
That I wanted to write a book.
Because you have 2 novels.
Right. Well, I realized I wanted to be a journalist in college when I worked for the Afro-American Cultural Centers. It was a publication called The Griot. And so I loved the idea, the interplay of talking to somebody and asking questions, and then synthesizing all of those answers and creating a story. The book thing, I didn't think about writing a nonfiction book until years later, but fiction, it was just part of that storytelling thing. And so I would work as a journalist by day, and at night I would come home and work on a novel. And I can't remember, it had to have been the very early 90s. I would get on the train. I had an hour-long commute into the city, and I would get on the train with this huge laptop. It was like one of the early laptops. It was a Zenith, and it was huge. And people would, they would sit next to me on the train, or they'd pass by and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'd be like, "I'm writing a novel." And it was a massive piece of equipment, but I'd lug it around, and somehow something came of it, a novel.
When did you realize you could full-time write books?
After my fellowship at Harvard, I think that if I hadn't had that time off, I wouldn't have understood just how you could have, just how cohesive the writing could be if you have the time to dedicate to it. Yeah, and so it was probably in about 2015 when I determined that this was something that I wanted to do full time.
All right, so for your novels, because it's not true of your memoir, but for your novels, are you a plotter or a pantster? Meaning, do you plot out how you're going to write everything, or do you write by the seat of your pants because your characters tell you what to say?
I think it's a little bit of both, where you have to be, you can structure it, and then you have to be flexible, and then go in the direction that the story takes you. And I think that that's true of nonfiction as well, in that you're not making stuff up, but you have a massive amount of material that could take you in different directions. And so you just have to figure out how it's going to, what's the best way to tell the story.
All right, we're going to see what kind of questions we have here for you. How and when do you write?
Oh, that's easy. That's the first thing I do when I get up in the morning. That I go immediately to the computer, and I write. I can write for hours, but if I get stuck, I exercise a lot, and so I'll either go for a bike ride or go for a long walk. And for me, I feel writing in my body, and I don't know if that makes sense, but I tense up in certain places, and so it helps me to work it out by exercising if I can't get through the story. And often if I know that if I'm stuck, it's because there's some research that's lacking. And so for me, there's no amount of beautiful writing that can cover up a hole in the research or reporting.
Right, you can't fake it.
Right.
Okay, Kathy wants to know, she says, I loved your memoir, structure, its tone, its messages. I felt like I knew Kim and Deborah through you. The person I wanted to know more about was Dawn, especially the relationships with David and Hannah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So as I said earlier, there's so much material when you're dealing with a memoir, especially our memoir covers over 5 decades, right? And so what I wanted to do was really make the story about 3 girls. And so I wanted to give more of myself. I mean, the journalist in me sometimes wanted to pull back, but in fairness to them, I could not tell their stories or reveal their secrets without talking about my own. And so I don't know that there really is anything else about Dawn.
I am not buying that for a minute.
Yeah. I have no more secrets.
Oh, I bet you do. With all your journalism background, with all the things you've covered, I am sure you are loaded with secrets.
Yeah. Well.
All right, I want to read a few of my favorite words from reviews of your work. The one that really stuck with me is a memoir told with honesty, grit, and sly wit that continually takes readers to unexpected places. Exceptional, evocative, outstanding, astounding. So when you hear those words of high praise, and I mean, come on, Maya Angelou, yikes, do you bathe in the happiness of it? Or is there a part of you that says, oh, they don't know me. Oh, I could never do this again. Oh, the imposter syndrome that women very typically get.
I think there's definitely gratitude. And I just want to be very careful that, you don't let this stuff go to your head, because I know the process was just so, as I said earlier, that sometimes I look at the book and it feels like a miracle, because there were times when I would call my friends and say, who said I could do this? Because it was just, there was so much to deal with. So it was a massive amount of material, but it was also just the depth of emotional engagement and excavation that a book like this required. So there was so much doubt. So whatever people are saying now, it's like, if you only knew how the sausage is made, because it was not pretty. But as I said, there's a lot of gratitude. So I'm grateful for that. But I also know that, you know, there are a lot of people who work incredibly hard on their memoirs or their novels or works of nonfiction, and the book just does not have that same type of resonance. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that it's not incredibly, it's not superior work. It's just that I feel very fortunate to have it, you know, resonate in this way.
And as it has. Regina wants to know, was there one defining moment in your childhood that helped you to become the person you are today?
No, I wouldn't say there's one. I think that there were many, and like many of us. I do say, and this wasn't in my childhood, but when I got to college, when I got kicked out after my freshman year and was told that I had to sit out a year, and then I went in there and made my case to just sit out for a semester. And so I promised myself that I wouldn't be invited to leave a place like that again, because college meant so much to me. And so and that was really, that was a defining moment. It was an inflection point, because I really do think it could have really changed, you know, the trajectory of my life.
So let's talk about the subtitle here, where it's a uniquely American memoir of race, fate, and sisterhood.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people would have said, well, just a unique memoir. Why was it so important to get American in there?
Because Bronzeville itself emerges from the uniquely American institution of slavery. Because you would not have a Bronzeville if it hadn't been for people, you know, being enslaved and then having been subjected to Jim Crow and then deciding to flee the South for the North. And so you had that whole, and I mean, I guess I'll give that as just one example of how, you know, and then you have a community that was shaped by redlining and restrictive housing covenants. All of those policies still reverberate today. And it's something that makes us, I mean, there are vestiges and similar policies in other countries, but I think that we have that particular institution of slavery. And maybe, I mean, you know, many stories can be considered to be uniquely American, but I thought it was really important, I mean, that this community shaped us, and it was shaped by a uniquely American institution.
Was there something in writing this memoir, because you did have to do a lot of excavation, as you said, you know, become an archaeologist, if you will, but was there something in writing this memoir that surprised you or changed you somehow, or you went, oh?
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed a lot of people, and there were people I interviewed who had known my sister, and they gave very concrete examples of how kind she had been to them. And so, you know, a lot of times people are lionized once they die, and people say nice things. So there were people who gave these concrete examples of how she had helped them. And that was it made my heart swell. And that was really, really important. And then when I talked to people about Deborah, it was something very similar, where I learned things about her that I hadn't known before, but not surprising. And then just her tenacity, and really, I knew she was smart, but in prison, she graduated summa cum laude, and it was a college that was not, they didn't, as she would say, dumb down the courses for them. I mean, the courses were rigorous, and she was able to, you know, as I said, she got her degree, her college degree.
Did you learn anything about yourself?
Oh, I learned a lot about myself, that I'm really good at compartmentalizing. And it's, but I had to go back and unpack things. And so I had to go into those compartments that I pushed away. But I didn't realize that I was as good at it as I did when I started to write this book.
So would it be true that if I said I had heard that Hollywood has come a knocking?
Yeah.
Come on, it's just us girls.
Go
ahead.
Well, I think it's very early. And so any knocking is just, it's just that. It's a knock. And so,
But also, but one of your other novels, even?
yes, that one, the first one was optioned, but that's been, that happened a long time ago.
Right. Okay. So there is talk about this. Like, I mean, to me, this is so Shondaland, so, Regina King, so Ava DuVernay. I mean, there's so many, I could see them just going, oh, the Obamas. I mean, they've got their own.
They've got a major public production company.
What did you say? I saw in an interview somewhere, you said people were always likening you to Michelle Obama. And you said, are there only two of us tall women, right? Black women?
Yeah, it's the voice. People would say I sound like Michelle. I'm like, I love the way she sounds, but I don't sound like her. But
but there's only two tall Black women,
right.
So that's where it all is.
Right.
What is it that you want people to take from this book, from Three Girls from Bronzeville?
I'm sorry, did you say, what do I want people to take away?
Yeah, what do you want them when they read it? What is it that you want them to take away?
It is very much a story of sisterhood and friendship. And it's about those relationships that we form when we're brand new and beginning, and how they're so deeply affecting, and how they just stay with us, and the people stay with us no matter how they leave us. And we all have that. I mean, that's part of the universalness of the book.
All right, so many of you have already purchased your copy of Three Girls from Bronzeville. If you have not, then you have found some links that are there in the chat box. Please use those. For those of you who purchased a general admission ticket, you get a $5 credit towards the purchase of any of Dawn's books. And as a thank you for attending the event. Plus, with your purchase, there are signed book plates for as long as they last. There's a discount code. I think it's like CCLW 2021. I know that it's in the chat box there for you. And it was in the Zoom. It's also, the book is available from Creating Conversations in ebook, an audiobook, in regular hard copy. Links to those again are in the chat. And remember, any book that you're looking for, please go to Creating Conversations first, because it's these independent bookstores that really keep these authors alive. And it's important to purchase from them. We need to keep these bookstores going. They would be honored to serve you. I know that that is definitely the case. Now, if you want to know more about Dawn, you can go to her Facebook page. Just look under Dawn Turner Trice and look for the beautiful woman you see in the picture here. That's the one you're going to see. That's when you know you've got the right one. If you want to know more about Creating Conversations, you can go to creatingconversations.org. And Literary Women, you can go to literarywomen.org. And we, of course, want to thank you for both of them for putting this all together for us, because it is such a wonderful opportunity for us. And we get to have met somebody like Dawn. But Dawn, I have one last thing I want to tell you of what I believe. There is a line from Pippi Longstocking that goes, "The whole world is full of things, and there's a crying need for someone to find them. And that's just what a thing finder does." I think you are a thing finder of ideas that you can share with all of us. Thank you so much for being with us. And for those who have attended tonight, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's been great. And thank you again to Literary Women of Long Beach and to Creating Conversations. We're so proud of you.
Thank you so much.